All right, in this video, we're going to talk about subsidies as it pertains to especially IB. So with this video, we're going to talk about subsidy and subsidy payments. So subsidy is the opposite of a tax. So while tax takes money away from businesses, a subsidy is going to be the government giving money to businesses. Now, a lot of times this money will come with ties to it in the form of, like in Tesla, for example, received a bunch of production subsidies in Nevada by the Nevada state government, and that was tied to hiring of Nevada citizens. So there was different production or hiring quotas that needed to be met, and kind of unlocked that subsidy over time. So the larger that Tesla grew in Nevada, the more money they would get, and the more workers they hired, the more the subsidy would be over time. And there were other restrictions on it, such as they had to work so many hours a week and had to be employed so many weeks or so many days per week, how many hours per day, stuff like that. So there's lots of things tied into it. So sometimes it's tied in that way, and sometimes it may just be like, here's $1 billion, and the government just simply gives money to businesses in order to produce things in hopes of hiring more workers and being beneficial and things like that. So let's take this example of the EV market. And so we have supply and demand and equilibrium price and quantity. So when the government initiates a subsidy, what that's going to affect is that subsidy is paid to producers who supply goods. And if producers have more money, they can increase the amount of factors of production they can buy. And so supply is going to increase. So with supply increasing, supply shifts to the right, supply plus subsidy. So they're going to produce a greater quantity at lower prices to consumers. So certainly with more factors of production, they can produce more, and that lowers the price that the buyers have to pay for electric vehicles. However, the firms like subsidies because it's payments to them. So firms don't really like the lower prices. So the idea being that the buyers, just like in our tax graphs, the price the buyers pay is different than the price the sellers receive. In taxes, the buyers would pay the higher price and the sellers receive the lower price. But with a subsidy, the buyers pay the lower price, but the firms receive a higher price. So when we drag this new quantity up, because the government is now subsidizing Q2, not Q1. So go back up to original supply curve and drag that across. So that is the price the sellers receive. And so that box here that's been created is the size of the subsidy that's necessary for this production level. So here is so just like with government revenue, it's the opposite. So this is how much government has to pay. So this is the size of the subsidy. Now it seems pretty large, but we can draw this any number of ways to make it smaller. So it's not necessarily that, wow, that's a lot more money compared to the tax graph. It's just how this is drawn and how I've decided to draw this, but we can manipulate the graph any number of ways to make the subsidy graph look smaller, or the size of the subsidy look smaller. Now, in terms of labeling the graphs in the areas, at this level we don't get into the consumer and producer surplus because they overlap and because it's very tricky. With the subsidy, consumers definitely benefit, because they pay a lower price and get to consume more, so they're better off. Sellers are better off, producers are better off, because they're selling more units at a higher price that they receive. So all that money is not coming from buyers. It doesn't really matter where it comes from. The sellers are getting a lot more money, so the higher price than they would at equilibrium. The government is worse off because they have to pay money that isn't free, and so the more money they give to the subsidized the EV markets, the less money they have for all their other endeavors that they go through. The workers are going to be better off because some of those workers are, employed by the EV market, and so therefore more workers are going to be needed. However, the part of this graph is deadweight loss if the market produces no externality, something we're going to cover in a couple topics from now. So if the government decides, I'm friends with the guy who owns the bread companies, so I'm going to subsidize the bread companies because I want my friend to have more money, and he's going to share some with me. That's going to be an inefficient use of government resources because that spending isn't free, because if you spend there, you got to spend less somewhere else. So The deadweight loss refers to this triangle here, where part of the subsidy is misallocated. So sure, producers benefit, workers benefit, buyers benefit, but some of that money has to be thought of as, and some of that production as overproduction. Now, we could actually make the case that in the electric vehicle market, there is a positive externality because electric vehicles are better for the environment. So the more electric vehicles that are produced, that's better for the environment, better for society. So if that is the case with the electric vehicles producing a positive externality, there would be no deadweight loss. And again, I know we haven't covered that yet, but there is that distinction. Sometimes subsidies will create deadweight loss, and sometimes subsidies can be used to prevent or lessen deadweight loss, which again we'll cover in a later topic. Going through each one of the stakeholders here, consumers are going to be better off because they're going to pay lower prices and consume more. Producers are going to be better off because they're going to sell for higher prices and sell more. The government is going to be worse off because they're going to have to spend money that's not free and they can't spend it somewhere else. Workers likely are going to be better off because some of those jobs created by the extra production will probably be human related, and so therefore there'll be more workers because there's more work to do. And society depends based on the externality. But basically for now, if again we subsidize my friend the bread maker, then society is going to be worse off. But if we subsidize a good that people want more of, such as electric vehicles to be driven or education, society can be made better off through the imposition of a subsidy, but we'll talk about those instances later.